And then our sermon text today is from Matthew's Gospel, the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 4, verses 1 through 11. And let me just remind you, this is God's words to us. It's given to us because He loves us. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. He fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. And afterwards he was famished. The tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But he answered, "It is written, 'One does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God.'" Then the devil took him to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, 'He will command His angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone.'" Jesus said to him, "Again it is written, 'Do not put the Lord your God to the test.'" Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. And he said to him, "All these I will give you if you will fall down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, 'Worship the Lord your God and serve only Him.'" Then the devil left him, and suddenly angels came and waited on him. This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Christ. Sorry, I need a sip. Wet my whistle here. So part of the traditional relationship of Lent to the life of Jesus comes from this very passage. Jesus' 40 days of fasting and then concluded by being tempted by Satan in the wilderness equals the 40 days of Lent. That's where we get the 40 days. And I want us to think about this season of Lent, this season of penitence and self-reflection as a time of preparation. It's a time of preparation for the celebration of Easter. And so we're going to use these Lenten lectionary passages to see Jesus' journey to the cross as preparation for the great Easter feast at its conclusion. And so we begin the 40 days of Lent with Jesus spending 40 days in the wilderness. The first thing Jesus experiences right after the official public launch of His public ministry is 40 days and 40 nights of being tempted by Satan in the wilderness. 40 days in the wilderness. If you paid any attention to me so far, the wilderness, while scary, it's scary, is where God most often shows up for us in the most powerful ways and does His best work in our lives. So while the wilderness can be a scary place, it's also a place where God comes and finds us. Now, in the past, whenever I have preached this sermon on the first Sunday in Lent, with Jesus being fasting and tempted by Satan in the wilderness, the rest of this sermon would continue to elaborate on the essence, the nature, and the reasons why God allows us to be tempted in the wilderness. In other words, it would take a very applicable to your individual day-to-day walk as a Christian kind of approach. But today, I'm not going to do that. I think you've heard that sermon before. I've certainly heard that sermon before, and all of that is true. It's not that it's not true. It's very true. This passage of Jesus being tempted by Satan in the wilderness is very applicable to your individual day-to-day walk as a Christian. But like anything related to who Christ is, what his kingdom is all about, and the work of salvation, anything related to those things has both an individual scope, what it means for you personally. At the same time, it has a cosmic scope. What does it mean for the entire world? What does it mean actually for the entire universe? So it has both an individual scope and a cosmic scope. So today, I wish for us to consider that the showdown between Satan and Jesus in the wilderness is about much, much more than just your and my struggle with temptation to sin. This showdown, this fight between Satan and Jesus is a fight at the cosmic level as much as it is a battle at an individual level. You see, when Jesus is revealed at his baptism, where we started Epiphany, when Jesus was revealed at his baptism to be the beloved Son of God in whom the Father is well pleased, Satan already knows that Jesus is the Son of God. When Jesus is revealed at his baptism to be that beloved Son of God in whom God is well pleased, Satan already knows Jesus is the Son of God. He doesn't need to tempt Jesus to pull some stunts to prove it. No, just like with Adam and Eve in the garden that we read earlier, Satan seeks to corrupt that identity. He seeks to twist it. And therefore, he seeks to corrupt the power that comes with that identity from the very start, to mold and shape Jesus' ascendance to power away from the sacrificial giving away of power of Jesus' kingdom to the status quo. To the status quo of hoarding power for oneself. This is not a temptation to prove if Jesus is the Messiah. It is a temptation of how to be that Messiah. It is a temptation of what kind of Messiah Jesus will be. And it begins with the temptation for Jesus to turn these stones into bread. Now, after 40 days of fasting in the wilderness, Jesus was surely hungry. It says it right there. It says he was famished. Okay, he's starving. I bet you and I would be too if we fasted for 40 days. And so Satan tempts him, turn these stones into bread. And Jesus says in return, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. Now, Jesus is quoting Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 3. Now, on face value, it seems Jesus is resisting Satan's temptation to use his power to feed himself by saying, more important than the nourishment of the body is the nourishment of the soul from every word that comes from God. You've probably heard that before, right? Well, man does not live by bread alone, but it certainly helps man to live. I don't know about you, but I like breakfast. Breakfast tends to help me get going on my day. You see, in the original context of Deuteronomy 8, if you go back and you read that chapter and that passage, and you look at what was going on when these words were spoken, man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. God's word or bread being more important is not really the point. That's not really what's going on. The context of Deuteronomy is to a formerly enslaved people on the verge of leaving their 40 years of wandering in the wilderness to enter into the promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey, is for the people not to mistake the material prosperity God has granted them, including bread that literally fell from the sky to feed them, as a temptation to forget where the bread came from in the first place. The context of Deuteronomy 8 is the temptation not just as individuals, but as an entire nation, the nation of Israel, being constituted, formed, and about to enter into their conquest of the promised land, an entire nation not to mistake their prosperity as no longer needing and taking for granted the God who made them prosperous in the first place. And God drives home the point in Deuteronomy 8 by reminding them for the 1000th time, you were slaves. You were slaves in Egypt, and I brought you out to freedom. Do not let your prosperity and freedom not only cause you to forget me, your God, but also do not let it make you forget that you were once slaves, and allow your prosperity. Don't allow your newfound freedom to be an excuse to abuse and enslave others. So you see, the temptation to turn stones into bread is the very thing that God warns the post-Exodus people when he says there in Deuteronomy 8, this is a direct quote from Deuteronomy 8, do not say to yourself, my power and the might of my own hand have gotten me this wealth. Because when you do, when you forget where it came from in the first place, when you forget what I've delivered you from, the oppressed then become the oppressor. This is mine. I earned this. My power and the might of my hand got me this wealth, and you can't have it. I control the bread, and I control who gets the bread. Because the golden rule is not do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The golden rule is he who has the gold eats the bread. And that's exactly what Israel did. And if you're not sure about that, then I would say go and read the Old Testament prophets. You'll start to get the point. So Jesus, as the new Israel, you have to understand, Jesus' life, we read about it there in Romans. Just as Jesus is the new Adam, Jesus is the new Israel. He is reliving the Israelite experience through the Exodus, through that whole story, now constituted in himself. As the new Israel, 40 days in the wilderness, says to Satan, I will not forget where the bread comes from. I will not allow material prosperity to corrupt me and my kingdom to be just like ancient Israel, just like all the other kingdoms of this world, the haves and the have-nots, the enslaved and the slave owners. Satan is against Christ. Satan is against Christ's countercultural, upside down, inside out, weak become strong, strong become weak, first shall be last, last shall be first way of being the Messiah. Again, this temptation is not prove if Jesus is the Messiah. This is a temptation of what kind of Messiah Jesus will be. And Satan is against Jesus' way of what the kind of Messiah he's going to be. Satan is against Christ. Meaning, Satan is anti-Christ. Okay, that's where we get that. Against Christ. Anti-Christ. So every institution, every power, every principality, every system and politic that says, I created this material wealth, by my own power and the might of my own hand, and you don't get to share in it, that is against Christ. It is anti-Christ. Number 2, throw yourself off the temple. Because if you are the Son of God, then God will command his angels to save you from splatting on the street down below. In fact, you won't even scuff your foot on one single rock or stone. And Jesus replies, it is written, do not put the Lord your God to the test. Now this is a quote from Isaiah chapter 7. In the context of Isaiah chapter 7, the nation of Judah, at this point the kingdom has been split between Israel and Judah. So now specifically the nation of Judah is under attack from 2 bad Syrians who have a lot of bad dudes with them. And it says, the heart of Ahaz, king of Judah, and the heart of the people of Judah shook like the trees of the forest shake before the wind. But God comes to King Ahaz and he says, ask for me a sign that everything is going to be okay. And Ahaz replies, I will not ask because I will not put the Lord to the test. I will not put the Lord to the test. And Jesus is quoting that verse. Now, that may seem like King Ahaz is saying, oh, no, I couldn't trouble you for that. I don't need to bother to ask you for a sign. You don't need to give me a sign, God. I trust you, God. No need to give me a sign. But Ahaz, in fact, did not trust the Lord. You see, when God comes to Ahaz and says, hey, ask of me a sign that I can prove to you that everything's going to be okay, Ahaz is already cutting deals. Ahaz has already made deals with the king of Assyria to go and attack Syria on Judah's behalf. Ahaz has already sent Assyria gold to pay them for protection. And Ahaz has firm faith that his plan will work. But all he's really done is just put Judah in Assyria's pocket. The same nation that has already taken away the nation of Israel and enslaved them, and one day was also going to enslave Judah, but that's for later. Ahaz doesn't need a sign from God because Ahaz has already relied on his gold to bail him out of this situation. But God already knows this. He's not surprised. He already knows Ahaz is cutting deals with Assyria and paying them a bunch of gold to protect them. And he says, isn't it not enough that you weary mortals with your lies, that you have to weary me with your lies also? I'll give you a sign. God says, you know what? I'm going to give you a sign anyway. It will be the sign of a virgin giving birth to a baby whose name will be called Emmanuel. And by the time that that baby is old enough to refuse the evil and choose the good, all these threats in front of you today that you're so afraid of, and all these false promises of deliverance that you are trusting in, they will be wiped away from the face of the earth. A baby. Your sign will be a baby. Not plagues and Passovers like Moses. Not a great military warrior like King David. A baby. And even if that baby is a miracle baby born of a virgin, babies do not instill confidence in you when facing down military invasion. Babies do not instill confidence when you are facing down military defeat and foreign occupation of your lands. You see, the crowds, Jesus' own disciples, perhaps the main thing that they struggled with during all of Jesus' ministry was this question: what kind of Messiah are you? What kind of Messiah would you be? Because their expectation of the Messiah was Moses, who brings plagues, who brings Passover, who destroys the kingdom, the superpower of Egypt. Their expectation was David, who will bring military might and who would come and beat the snot out of the Romans who are subjugating them. He would come and beat the snot out of the Romans who occupied their lands and put them under Roman rule and would elevate Israel back to the top of the world pecking order and food chain. Jesus knew that if he performed a miraculous acrobatic trick like jumping off the temple and surviving it like Spider-Man, the crowds would not be able to control themselves. That kind of public spectacle would whip them into a frenzy to anoint him king on the spot and take up arms to overthrow Rome. And Satan knew that too. Just go and read the Gospels. How many times does Jesus say, you don't come seeking to find God, you come seeking another miracle like the one that put food in your bellies? How many times did Jesus say to his disciples when they argued who would get to sit at Jesus' right hand and left hand once Jesus is emperor, not Caesar, that the Son of God didn't come to be served, but to serve? How many times when the disciples tried to deter Jesus from going to Jerusalem at the height of the assassination plots against Jesus, did Jesus have to say to them, "Get behind me, Satan"? What did the crowds jeer at Jesus while he hung on a cross? Well, if you could heal the sick and give the blind their sight, surely you can save yourself from this pain. Come down off of that cross, and then we will believe that you are truly the Son of God. You see, Jesus doesn't want to enslave followers with spectacles. He doesn't want to enslave followers with promises with gold and promises to protect them from having to suffer. He wants to free followers who follow him because he will not bypass the suffering. In fact, it is what is seen as weak and foolish in the world, a baby, right? That's what we're getting back, a baby. It is what is weak and foolish in the world that is actually what's going to bring God's kingdom come. Any spectacle, any promise that says safety and security can be bought. You can skip the suffering as long as you're willing to give up your freedom. Any of those promises are against Christ. They are anti-Christ. And so finally, Satan just jumps straight to the shortcut. In essence, Satan is saying, you know what, truth be told, just because you control the bread and give it to the people, or just because you control their attention through awesome spectacle and amazing feats and acts, they'll still rebel against you someday. I mean, look at Israel. Destroying Egypt and the Passover and the Red Sea, and feeding them bread that fell from the sky, that wasn't enough. It didn't convince them to remain faithful to Yahweh. So look here, Jesus. I'll just give it to you. You can have it. Just bow the knee to me. You don't have to suffer. You don't have to die. You don't have to convince all these people to love you and serve you. It's yours already. Just take it. You are powerful enough to make all of them your possession anyway. You already have that power. Because you see, behind all of Satan's temptations, and especially this last one, are the words of Psalm 2. Which reads this: I will tell of the decree. The Lord said to me, You are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron, and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Those are the words ringing behind all of Satan's temptations of Jesus. Again, not if he's the Messiah, but what kind of Messiah will you be? Don't you see all of Satan's lies? Even going back to the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve, all of Satan's lies, in fact, for any lie to be effective, to be really effective as a lie, it has to contain truth. It has to contain truth. In fact, it's even a better lie if it's almost 99% true. And only a little tiny bit of it is a lie, or at least only a little tiny bit of it is just twisting that truth to make it a lie. But you got to give it to Satan. It does sound clever. Look, Jesus, God said you are his son. Psalm 2 says you're going to break them into pieces anyway. It's your right to do so. That's how it works. So take that rod of iron that is rightfully yours and do it already. Just do it already. I'll step out of the way. Don't wait anymore. Smash them to pieces. Make it yours. It all belongs to you anyway. Go for it. In fact, Satan's rhetoric sounds so convincing, he's not the only one who uses it. People still use this rhetoric. People today still use this logic. Somebody said recently, this is a direct quote, we live in a world, in the real world, that is governed by strength, that is governed by force, that is governed by power. These are the iron laws of the world that have existed since the beginning of time. That's a direct quote. You don't need to ask permission. If you have the power to do so, it is your right from the beginning of time privilege to take it by force. Jesus' response, he quotes from Deuteronomy 6. In Deuteronomy 6, God takes all the Old Testament law given through Moses to the people, again on the verge of entering the promised land, and says, listen, all these rules, all these commandments, all these statutes I have given you, I want you to do them, but they can basically be summed up like this. And this is the Shema in Deuteronomy 6. This is like the Pledge of Allegiance for the nation of Israel. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. Deuteronomy 6 is considered to be the greatest commandment, all the way up until the religious and political authorities come to Jesus and ask him, Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? And Jesus says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and all your strength. And you shall love your neighbor as you love yourself. And then he goes on to say, these, plural, are the greatest commandment, singular, and on them hang all of the law and all of the prophets combined. So don't you see, Psalm 2 is correct. Psalm 2 is truth. Jesus has the power. Jesus has the right to take that iron rod and break the nations into pieces. Jesus has the power to warn the kings of the earth to fear and tremble and kiss the Son, lest he become angry, for his wrath is quickly kindled. And yet, Jesus doesn't. He doesn't. He doesn't do it. Instead, Jesus is shattered into pieces. Instead, Jesus is shattered into pieces by a rod of iron. He doesn't use his strength. He doesn't use his force. He doesn't use his power to force the world to bow the knee to him and put them all under his big thumb. Instead, Jesus dies. Because the greatest commandment, the iron law, singular, that has existed since the beginning of time, is what does love require? Any worldview, any doctrine, any guiding framework that says sovereignty is conditional, law is optional, and legitimacy flows only from the ability to dominate, to quote the journalist J.J. Green, any worldview, doctrine, guiding framework that says those things is against Christ. It is anti-Christ. Satan confronts Jesus in the wilderness at a moment of weakness and vulnerability, and Jesus comes out of the wilderness determined to fulfill the greatest commandment from the beginning of time. What does love require? Every step of the way, in the face of shallow crowds who just want to be fed and watch the spectacle, in the face of disciples who never get him right, and who want him to take it all by force so long as they get to have positions of privilege in his new cabinet when he's done. In the face of betrayal, in the face of suffering, in the face of death, Jesus never wavers from doing what love requires. And if you want to follow him, then you too have to renounce everything that is against Jesus and his kingdom. Everything that is anti-Christ. Take up a cross and follow him in doing what love requires. And that won't be easy. Jesus promises that it won't. But in this wilderness where we live, that's where Jesus shows up. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.